Hey guys, my name is Vishal and I welcome you all to yet another session by Edureka. In today's session, we are going to talk about AWS Config. But before we do go ahead and unravel various nitty-gritties of this particular topic, let's take a look at the offerings of this particular session. First and foremost, I would be talking about what Amazon Web Services is. It is important we understand what this is so that we can go ahead and unravel the other services or the topics that we are going to talk about. Next, I would talk about what is AWS Config in particular and would also understand what does it do exactly. Then I would talk about different terminologies that surround this particular topic. And finally, I would finish things off with the demo part. So let's not waste any time and quickly jump into the first topic of discussion, that is what is Amazon Web Services. Now, if you talk about cloud computing, we all know that these days data is moving to cloud. Almost everything is moving to cloud, whether you talk about applications, whether you talk about your overall infrastructure, whatever it is, people these days prefer cloud. Why? Because it lets you do cloud computing or computing rather in much better way than what you could do on your on-premise architectures or infrastructures. That is why we see this modernization or this adaptation rather. And since everything is moving to cloud these days, we need proper cloud service providers that provide us with various services that help us carry out cloud computing on this platform or on the cloud rather. So when you talk about these cloud service providers, you cannot shy away without talking about AWS, which is one of the most popular cloud service providers in the market. Now, if you talk about Amazon Web Services, it lets you do various things. It started off with some basic services like compute services, database, storage, content delivery, virtual private networks, etc. But as time progressed, its stack of services actually increased. Now we talk about machine learning, data visualization, recommender systems, application creation. Almost everything is taken care by Amazon Web Services. And that is what makes it one of the best in the market. For people who are completely new to this session, I would suggest that you do visit our YouTube channel and take a look at the videos on Amazon Web Services and cloud computing. Because we've talked about Amazon Web Services and cloud computing in detail there, and those topics have been discussed to the very core. As far as this session goes, we would be focusing on AWS config, and that is why I won't be spending too much time talking about what AWS is exactly. But to keep it simple, it is nothing but one of the leading cloud service providers, and it lets you perform all the services which I just mentioned. So what exactly is AWS config? Now, as we all know, if you talk about AWS, we know that we would be creating quite a few services, resources, and we would be deleting, modifying, and continuously work or play with those services, isn't it? I mean, that is how architectures work. There would be some change or the other. So what happens is when these changes happen, the problem is it becomes difficult to keep track of all the things that is happening around you. And at times that might affect your decision making. So if there is something that lets us do all these things, that is keep track of everything is that is happening around, we would be in a much better position to actually go ahead and manage our business and our infrastructure. So this is where AWS config steps in. What it does is it lets you assess your data, it lets you evaluate it, and also audit it. That means it ensures that there is continuous monitoring of your data. And since you can continuously monitor your data, you can keep track of everything that is happening around you. Plus, if there is some change that takes place in your infrastructure or in your resources, what happens is Amazon config, it basically throws in a notification by using something called as simple notification service. That means you would be notified of changes that are happening. So that means since you're getting notified about all the changes that are happening, you're in a much better position to go ahead and manage your resources. Plus, you can take a call as in whether you want to go ahead and automate certain configurations. And if you want to, AWS config helps you in doing that as well. What it also does is, since you're monitoring everything, it's important that you keep a record of everything that is happening. And AWS configuration lets you record the changes or monitoring process or everything that is happening around you in a much better way. So this is what AWS config is. Let's just move further and try to understand what else can it do. Well, if you talk about AWS config, what it does is it lets you retrieve configuration information about your resources. As I've already mentioned, you'd be having more than one resource that is being used. Whether you talk about your virtual machines, you talk about your elastic block storage volumes, whatever it is. I mean, these are your entities, these are your resources. And you'd want to retrieve configurations or information about these resources. And your AWS config lets you do that. Whether you talk about historical data, again, your AWS config lets you collect that as well. It produces a snapshot. That means it captures the information of all the configuration items as one or as a combined unit. And it lets you evaluate various resource configurations as well, because you'll be knowing what is changing, what is not, what needs to be updated, and all those things. As I've already mentioned, you have something called as SNS that lets you send notifications in case if any change has happened. And it also shows you relevant relationships between your resources. Now, this is important because you're talking about complete architecture and you need to know how your resources are related to each other. And again, whether there's any change between these relationships as well. What are some of the terminologies that AWS Config has to offer to you? Now, AWS resources. When you talk about resources, these can be anything, right? I mean, I just talked about quite a few services that AWS has to offer to you. If you talk about AWS config, it manages or it controls or it can actually look into quite a few services like your compute services. When you talk about EC2, it is a compute service. Your AWS config can actually monitor those resources as well. It can monitor resources like the ones that are provided by your VPC, your storages, and all those things. It can monitor all these services, and the resources or the items that are created using these services are nothing but your AWS resources, your configuration items. Now, when you talk about configuration items, think of it as the information about your configurations. Say, for example, the metadata of your configuration items or your resources is called as your configuration item rather. Configuration snapshot. As I've already mentioned, since you have so many items, what snapshot does is it lets you get a grouped picture of all these resources together. Resource relationship. Now, as I've already mentioned, if you're looking at a bigger picture, you need to understand how resources are related to each other. Say, for example, your EC2 instance might have some volume attached to it, right? So what volume is attached to it? What is the instance that you're using? All this information. This can be predicted or depicted by using your resource relationship. And the relationship between these entities or resources is called as basically a relationship, as in how everything happens between two or more resources, or how do they exactly communicate with each other. Configuration stream. Since we are talking about monitoring your data, now there would be a track kept of everything that is happening. Suppose some resource gets deleted, something gets added, right? So this needs to get added in the flow that you have. Like, okay, at this time a resource was created. At this time this was deleted and this was added to it. So these items that get added into a particular stream or a particular flow, this flow is called as your configuration stream or your configuration flow rather. Configuration recorder. As I've already mentioned, since you're talking about monitoring, it's important that all the events or actions that are happening around you, those get recorded. And your AWS config or your AWS config recorder lets you record all those things. What I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to switch into my AWS console and let's just go ahead and take a look at a demo and understand what AWS config is and how does it actually look when you do go ahead and implement those things practically. So stay tuned and let me just switch into the demo part, guys. So yes, guys, what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've switched into my AWS console and this is how it looks like. For people who are completely new, they should have a free tier account in order to use AWS services. Now, what is a free tier account? Let me give you a quick overview of it. If you just search for AWS free tier, you would be redirected to this page and you can see AWS free tier. You can click on it and this is what you'd have. Now, what this page indicates is you can use certain services provided by AWS for free. You can see them here. These are some of the popular services. You have your EC2, which is a compute service, QuickSight, an analytics service. Basically, it is for data visualization. You have your RDS, which again is a database service. For storage, you have Amazon S3, that is simple storage service, and their capacities and their stretches are also given. As in, you can use Amazon S3 where you can store 5 GB of data. And if you talk about AWS Lambda, you can have free requests that is 1 million in number. So depending upon the service, you have different types of usages that are made available to you for free. And this free tier, it actually extends for one complete year. So you can use these services in that course of time. If you do exceed these services, as in the limits that are specified, you might be charged. But do not worry, AWS would actually go ahead and notify you as in, okay, this is the amount that you've used and this is what you're supposed to pay. That is if you exceed it. You can also go ahead and set alarms so that you would be notified if you exceed a particular limit. Suppose you have X amount of limit. Probably when you reach the 80% of limit, you can set an alarm for it saying that, okay, if I reach this limit, give me a notification. So you would be notified and you won't be charged anything. Yeah, to create an account, you need your card details, maybe a credit card and even debit card. I've tried debit card. Debit card also works. You have to go ahead, sign into the console, and certain details would be asked as in, okay, why do you need to use this account? What is your email ID? and the card details, and you'd be good to go. So I would suggest that you do go ahead and create this free tier account, and once you do that, you would be having this console made available to you, and you can use the services that are mentioned here. So now let's get started with the demo part where we left off in the theory part. That is, we talked about Amazon config. I'm going to give you a quick overview as in how does config works and what all can it do. The thing is, when you talk about getting the notifications or getting notified for certain things, it actually takes a longer while than normal. So I'm not sure that if I do go ahead and implement some of the changes, would those be reflected right away? Meanwhile, what I'll do is I'll just put forth a change quickly and we'll see that by the time this session ends, do we get that change reflected or not? Okay. To start with, let's go to this thing, EC2 instance. Now I have one running instance here. As you can see, this is the one and it is in running state right now, isn't it? So if I just go ahead and maybe change its state to stop, it takes somewhere around 25 to 26 minutes for these changes to get reflected in the log that we have. That is what I've noticed till time. So there might be a possibility that if we are making this change, we might not see the reflection right away. So meanwhile, this thing gets shut or stop. Let's just go ahead and try something else. So let me just quickly switch into the AWS config. There you go. So once I switch into AWS config, I actually get the dashboard directly, isn't it? For people who are new to AWS config and they haven't used this service, this is not what you'd get here. You'd get a page that says get started. And once you click on get started, you would be redirected to a page and that page would look something like this. Yeah. So note one thing, right now we are in the North Virginia region. When the service started, basically all the config services were mostly available in this region, but that has changed with time and now we can have it in other regions as well. So yep, by default I've selected this region. You can choose other regions as well. So if you do get started, you'd be getting that page, and once you click on get started, this is where you would be redirected. Now this is what we have here, dashboard, which gives me details about all the services that are there. Now in my case, the recording has started already. Might not be the case in your situation. So when you do start the recording, whatever changes that happen with the resources in this region would be reflected by your config service, and your services would be like given here or shown here in this dashboard itself. So let's just go ahead and see what you have to do exactly. As you can see, the recording is turned on for me. So my state is getting recorded right now, whatever is happening here with my resources. So what you have to do is you have to come here and you have to select this, as in what resources do you want to monitor? Record all the resources that are supported in this region. I've said yes. And also include global resources. I've said yes to that as well. So it would be giving me details about all the services and resources that are there in this so-called region. We won't play with this data retention. S3 bucket. Now guys, S3 bucket, as I've already mentioned, S3 is a storage service. It is a simple storage service and it stores data in the form of objects, and these objects, they get stored in containers called as buckets. So everything, even when you do go ahead and create this simple notifications, when you go ahead and create a notification service which would give you notification or notify you with the changes, those have to be put somewhere, right? So those changes would be put in a bucket. You need a bucket for that as well. So we'd be creating a bucket here. So as you can see, there's a bucket which I'm already using. I have something CF demo bucket. I've actually have quite a few buckets here. So I can just go ahead and pick any one of these buckets if I want to. As far as you're concerned, if you're creating a new bucket, I would suggest that you go ahead and create one. Creating one is very simple. You can click on this thing and you can specify a name and that bucket would be created for you. Now bucket is nothing but a simple storage container. I've already shown you that, but still for people who I believe are completely new might wonder as in what this bucket is. So guys, if you go to S3, see, this is my S3 service and I have certain buckets here. Some of the ones that I've used, if you open those, you might have some data. As you can see, AWS logs. Now these are the logs that actually got collected the last time I made some changes here. It's somewhere around 12:26 p.m. is when the changes happened, and those are here in the form of a file here. So SNS puts in the data in your bucket each time there is a change that has happened. So yeah, that is why we just go ahead and create a bucket here. Now I have a bucket, as you can see, and the bucket that I've used here is this one, bucket for demo, right? I also have one more bucket, which is this. It too has some logs. So if changes happen, these buckets get updated. Permissions, as you've seen, I've set it to public because I want my config to interact directly with the buckets. Now, depending upon your applications, there might be certain restrictions on the buckets that you use. But in my case, I wanted it to be, as I've already mentioned, public because it is a simple demo and I do not have too much concerns about security right now. So I've given all the access to everyone as in public access so that if something gets dumped, they are allowed to dump it in my bucket. Going back, so once you create a bucket, you choose one. So I've selected this one. Do I want an SNS topic? Yes, I want an SNS topic. I've created an SNS topic called a sample topic for today. So, and I've gone ahead and selected that only. So you can just go ahead and create one more if you want. You can put in a name that you want, but I would be choosing an existing one. And then what about a rule? Do you want to select one or use the one that is existing? I would say just go ahead and use an existing AWS config service linked role. And then I would say save. If your bucket permission policy isn't approved, I mean, if it does not have right access or rights, there would be an error here saying that you do not have actual bucket rights or the required bucket rights. In that case, you need to come here and change the permissions here. Once you do that, you'd have this thing would get approved. As simple as that. So there you go. This has been saved. And if I come to dashboards, in that case, my recording has also started. And if I go to some instance or some resource, suppose I selected EC2 right now. This is the config timeline. I click on it. As you can see, all the changes are reflected here. There was one change that was made at this time duration and it got reflected. This was the other. Probably there are 5 changes is what they're saying. So these were the changes that happened and the log got updated accordingly. This was the time when it got created. This was the time when some changes took place. This was the other time when some changes took place, and same was with this. If you just stop it and start it again, in that case too, the changes would be reflected. I just stopped the instance, right? But that isn't reflected here. Why? Because it takes a while for the log to get updated. Now, if you click on this thing, you can see the changes that are there. There are changes. 5 of those are configuration changes. The details are given as in what are the changes that have happened. You can check through the log as well. Are there any relationship changes? No, not for now. So if I do go ahead and attach a security group or something like that, or maybe attach a volume to it, the change would reflect as in, okay, this is a relationship change that has happened. So even that is possible if you want to. So this is what your AWS config does. It gives you details about everything that has happened and all the changes that have taken place till time. Apart from that, you can just go ahead and pick other services as well. Now I've come to the dashboard. If I click on this icon, now these are some of the options that you might want to consider. As in, can you just go ahead and search for something directly? If you have the ID, you can put the ID here and search for it as well. This would help you look up. So when you click on lookup, the list is shown down here. And this is the bucket that we have, right? You can see there's a log for this as well. And there was one change that happened at this time of the day. This was the time when I changed the permissions of the bucket. So that is why this change is reflected here. Whatever changes that are there, that would be given here. Plus, one more important point that you need to know is when you do go ahead and make certain changes, not all the changes would be monitored directly. For some changes, you have to set up certain policies as well, or have to configure some other things as well. For example, if I come to my EC2 instance, if I click on this icon, what you can see here is if I scroll down, I have monitoring enabled, right? So I need my monitoring to be enabled for this instance to get monitored. In my case, what happened was when I started using AWS and AWS Config Service in particular, when I created an instance, monitoring wasn't enabled by default. So I did go ahead and make some changes, but those were not notified and I was wondering why is that the case. For that, I had to go ahead and enable monitoring as well. So I did that. And how do you do it? You go back to services, say EC2. It would give me a list of my instances here. Okay, this is the stopped instance. You can just click on it and this is the option here, monitoring. You have to say enable. Once you do it, it's good. You can just go ahead and look for tags as well. Now, if I go back to my config, the internet is a little slow for some reason. So yes, that is a little irritating at times. There you go. Yeah, I open my EC2 instance. Yeah, this is what it is. Now, while looking for it, I can search it in different ways as well, based on the compliance status, tag, and resources. So that is what happens. And once you do go ahead and create an instance, and if you put in all these properties, monitoring would be enabled. But then again, to reflect some other changes. Now, if I open this instance, I get all the changes shown here, right? As in this is what has happened. But for that, I also need to create an inventory first. If you click on it, it says manage instance inventory is unavailable. To configure an instance for an inventory collection, go to this console. Now, this is where you'd get all the information as in why do you need an inventory and how do you create one. It's very simple. You can just come here and say AWS management. Sorry, it's AWS systems management. So you have the systems manager here. If you scroll downwards, go to insights, you actually have the option of inventory, and you can just say set up an inventory. It would ask certain details as in what is the name and by when do you need to get notified. Schedule 30 minutes. After every 30 minutes, data would be collected in your inventory and that would be reflected on your config service. That is why it takes a little longer than normal time is what I've told you. So when you do make changes after this duration, the changes would be reflected in your so-called config service for each individual resource. So once you do that, come here and set up an inventory and the inventory would be created. And once you do that, you can come here and view all the changes that is in your AWS config service. One more thing, guys, if you want to get notified in the form of emails, we've actually gone ahead and set up a SNS topic, right? So you can actually go ahead and subscribe for that thing as well. For that, you have to search for simple notification service and this dashboard would appear. So if you click on topics, it gives you an option. Do you want to create a new topic? You can say yes if you want to, or you can use the existing one as well if you have any. Now, in our case, we had created one, right? There you go. This is the one we had. So I have a subscription to this topic. You can just click on it and say actions. You can say subscribe to this topic. And to do that, it would give you an option. How do you want to subscribe? You can just click on email here and enter some email ID and put in that email ID here and just say subscribe. Now you have your topic ARN, you have your protocol and you have the endpoint. And once you click on create, I'm canceling it right now. Once you click on create, you'd be given a notification in your email ID or in your email account basically. Subscription confirmation. You have to click on this link and your account would be created. So you'd be getting notifications each time there's an update, like it is in my case. As you can see, these are following updates and I've been notified with the updates, whatever have happened. This is the latest one, guys. See, it's 3:21, the time duration. I updated the account details is what it is saying. What I did was I actually stopped my instance, right? So that is what it notified me for. As in, okay, this is the change that has happened. So that is what your SNS does. It sends in messages saying that these are the changes that have happened. So if you go back to config, I just want to see whether that change gets reflected or not. I'm not sure that it would happen this soon. If it does, well and good, I would be able to show that change to you people as well. Let's hope it does. There you go, guys. There's a change here, right? And 7 changes happened in total. So 321. This is the change it is reflecting. And the change was we actually did go ahead and we stopped it. So that is the change that is reflected here. So if I just go back and start the instance again, in some time, the change would be reflected here. So this is how it works. It basically does go ahead and do all these things as in you can monitor all the services, you can assign certain rules, policies, you can take care of all the relations that are there. Now, if you scroll down here, you can see there are relationships as well. As in, how is this instance connected to other things and what are the other things that it is connected to? It has a volume that is attached to it and all those things. So you get all these informations and you get notified continuously. And my AWS is currently recording all the information that is going here. I mean, all the changes that are happening here. So it's your option as well, as in whether you want to get it recorded or you don't want to get it recorded. So yes, guys, this is more or less the demo part, and this is what I wanted to talk about. As far as this session goes, I would be resting it here. I hope you all had something new to learn and nice to learn. If you all do have any queries, put those queries in the comment section below and we'd be more than happy to get back to you with replies as soon as possible. Stay tuned for more valuable sessions. I hope you'll get something new to learn each time. As far as this session goes, I would be resting it here and here. Thank you. Bye-bye.